So today we will be learning about children with learning disabilities. Just like in previous weeks, I will be posting the PowerPoint by itself as well as the actual video, as well as the links. So that way you can go ahead and check out all the information that is included in this particular presentation. Excuse me. So to get started, the federal definition for learning disability is very long and has a lot of information. So basically what you need to know when it comes to a learning disability, basically it is a disorder. It is not a disease, which we learned about the difference of that during week 1. And a learning disorder impacts language, how it's spoken or written, excuse me, as well as in math. So math is one of those subjects, as we all know, that engages all of, well, most of the senses. It doesn't engage smell or taste, but you have to listen, you have to think, you have to read, write, spell, and then be able to do, which is the analysis part of math, in order to be able to do it. So when it comes to learning disabilities, under this umbrella, you may find dyslexia, you will find dysgraphia. That's where a person's written language does not come out in the same way that they're processing it. They can also have an auditory processing disorder. So what they're hearing is not being processed in the same manner as it's being given. Or it could be the inverse of that, meaning they could know the answer but not have the skills to eloquently state. And I shouldn't even say eloquently, but they're not able to successfully express exactly what they're thinking in the same thought pattern. So you can see how that could be a problem when you're being tested, or whether it be orally or in written, because or in writing, because what you know is not being effectively expressed in writing or in or verbally. Now, when it comes to having a learning disability, an individual must meet these 2 criteria. Their current levels have to be significantly below what it should be for their age and their ability levels. So that's where milestones and benchmarks come back into play again. And then 2, the area of discrepancy or the area of deficit has to be in one of these 7 areas. So you have your oral expression, how you speak, how you convey your thoughts. You have listening comprehension. So in that case, if you are sharing a story and then you turn around and ask Johnny to share what you thought about, the story, you would expect Johnny to at least give an overview or maybe pinpoint a certain thing that happened in the story. But if Johnny gives you something that's completely out of left field, or throws things in there, throws things into his summary of the information that was not even mentioned, then that might raise an eyebrow or 2. Written expression, once again, self-explanatory. What they're writing, how they write, what they're writing. Is it a complete thought? Basic reading skill, self-explanatory. Are they at the same level as their peers? Are they below? Are they significantly below? Reading comprehension, are they understanding what they're reading? Are they able to give a summary of a story? Are they able to take a story and carry it further based off of prior knowledge? Math calculations, just being able to do basic math. Then mathematics reasoning comes into play when you're doing problem solving. Because of course, with problem solving, you have to look at a scenario, the infamous, a train leaves Chicago at this time and another train leaves LA at this time. At what point will they come together? So you have to look at all of this information, analyze it in order for the student to come up with an answer. Now, when it also comes to learning disabilities, it can also affect these major cognitive processes. The perception, how are they perceiving the information? It is very, very well known in research that individuals with autism, for example, and sometimes those with autism will also have a learning disability, they perceive things to be sometimes worse than they truly are. I'm so sorry about that. and sometimes just different. So something may be an emergency and they may not see it that way, or vice versa. It may not be an emergency. A student's attention ability can also be affected when they have a learning disability. ADHD also falls up under this umbrella, and truly their brains have a hard time tending to one task, and so therefore, and their inability to focus causes their attention to be drawn to a myriad of things that draw them away from the content that they're supposed to be learning. Memory, this comes up with students who have different TBIs, which are traumatic brain injuries, as well as in learning disability, a learning disability. And the memory is in fact affected in a way that it could be short-term or long-term memory. So they may have a hard time grasping what's being put in front of them, if like immediately, unless they're given opportunities to practice it. Some people learn better when they write things down. It's good also to do content checks sometimes with your students, and it could be basically like if I were to do one right now, I may, if we were in a traditional setting, turn around and say, hey Talia, would you mind sharing with me, your take on how reading comprehension, someone with a reading comprehension deficit could benefit from a memory strategy. And so then of course then I would expect her to turn around and say something along the lines of, if given different strategies for remembering different parts of the story, maybe graphic organizers, if you're familiar with those. Basically you can make them out of anything, but it's something visual that helps everyone remember information quicker, and it also helps with helping establish a flow to a story. If you want them to remember the main characters or remember the plot, you can make a graphic organizer just focuses just on that. Cognition is understanding. Kind of goes hand in hand if a person has a learning disability, and we already know that it affects different parts of the brain when it comes to reading, listening, math, spelling. The understanding is also going to be impacted in some form or way. Excuse me. And then with organization, that can be anything from organizing their thoughts to be able to communicate clearly. It could be organizing their thoughts to be able to write things down into a concise sentence or a concise paragraph or story. It could also mean just organizing their backpack or getting, a planner or things of that nature. Just ways to help bring some order to their life, so that way it brings a little less, it brings some, brings some form and functionality to their chaos. Learning disabilities and academic performance, I encourage you to check out the video here. It goes hand in hand with your reading. Language arts, which includes spelling, written language, and spoken language. And then of course, mathematics. And then when it comes to teaching students with learning disability, there are basically 3 areas to look at. You have direct instruction, which is pretty much how I would believe most of us were taught. The teacher stands in the front, they may put something on the board, maybe on the projector, or show a video that talks about different content. They're going to bring in different materials to enhance the content, maybe a video, maybe a guest speaker. But basically, it's coming from the instructor straight to the student, and then the student practices and moves on. But then sometimes you have students who definitely need more direct instruction. So in this picture here, you have the young lady who looks like she could either be the teacher or the aide, and she's working with this little guy, and I'm not really sure what skill they're working on, but I'm assuming it's something with math or maybe with the clock. But she's helping him one-on-one with, this particular skill that he needs so that he can go on and join the rest of his peers. Sometimes you can have strategy instruction. So if a student is having a hard time, say for instance with subtraction, so you may want to have them in direct instruction, but if you do strategy instruction, then you're going to be looking at maybe subtraction across the curriculum. So we're going to look at how many people went to war, how many people came back. Let's subtract the numbers. Maybe obviously it wouldn't be a class this young, but if you're in 4th grade and you're talking about California history, that could be something that comes up. So you could talk about subtraction in the not only in the math sense, but also when it comes to history and things of that nature. Or even if you're, if a person is very, very wordy or very, very verbose when they're writing their papers or their paragraphs or essays, and you want to talk about them subtracting some of the words and making it more succinct, and maybe narrowing it down to one page. So you're taking that strategy of subtraction and using it across the board. And the reason why I'm giving you these different examples is because later on in the slides, we're going to talk about generalization and how it's important that skills and strategies be generalized for all students. And as a matter of fact, it won't come up in this particular chapter, but generalization comes up in the next chapter, which is about intellectual disabilities. Then you have special skills instruction. This could be study skills, social skills, time management skills. These are basically skills that are focused solely on one thing. Social skills comes up a lot when working with individuals with autism, because regardless of their academic level, I would say most, I'm not going to say all, have some social skill deficits that are there, whether it's something as simple as, well, simple for you and I, as entering a conversation, entering a room. There may need, a certain student may need to be given or allowed to practice, I should say, social skills, so they know how to enter a room if they're not familiar with it, how to join a conversation, appropriately. Which is something that I find a lot of people could benefit from, because you'd be amazed at how many people I know who are not on the spectrum and do not have disabilities who will walk up to you regardless of what you're doing, and these are adults and sometimes older than me, and will just start having a conversation with you as if they can do that. And it's like, where did you learn your social skills? Because who walks up to someone blatantly and just starts talking, especially if they're in a conversation with someone else. But I digress. Then you have study skills. Goes without saying, I think at some point every person who's ever been a student ever has had to engage in some type of study skill, and then somewhere along the line you figured out which ones you liked and you stuck with them, and they continue to work for you as long as your grades were where you wanted them to be. Now, when it comes to presenting information, you always want to take into different accounts what's available for you to use as the instructor, but also, and most importantly, the child's disability. Because of course, if you're presenting something and you have a room with even just one person with a vision impairment, you're going to want to make sure you have instruction in there and presentation techniques that definitely explain a lot of the descriptions of what everyone else is seeing. So you want to take into account every single disability that you are aware of in the classroom, so that you can make sure you are targeting them and in the sense of making sure their needs are met. Not targeting them in the sense of saying, well, we would have had these lovely pictures, but, nothing like that. But you'd be surprised at the things that people will say. And they don't do it to be mean. They just kind of do it, I think, sometimes with their awkwardness with the actual subject. But it's just an interesting thing to hear about and or to see. But when it comes to presenting information, you can sometimes do it in a small group, and that can be really helpful because it helps build confidence among the group. So if you have a mixed group of people, some are great at, say for instance, speaking, some are good at math, some are good at calculating data, you put them in a small group instruction, they have an opportunity to feed off of each other's strengths in order to complete the assignment. And you may see this a lot, say for instance, in the upper elementary school and middle school and probably high school as well, where the teachers will be deliberate in how they group students. So that way there's a greater, the hope is there's a greater rate of success because they've mixed that group up with different skill sets that they can all play off of each other, versus putting all the students who are really good at collecting data in one group, or letting all the ones who are really, really good at presenting in front of everyone and not so great at the other techniques. So it gives an opportunity for everyone in the group to build self-esteem. Then you have your using response signals. Sometimes when you call in a class, sometimes anxiety can be instantly heightened the moment a teacher says, raise your hand if, or the even one that's even worse than that is when they say, I'm going to call on you to give a response, and everyone be ready. So then everyone's sitting there on pins and needles, not knowing who's going to be called on, if you're going to know the answer, dealing with the embarrassment of it. So when you have students with learning disabilities, if you have response signals, this could be helpful. One of the things that Daphne Wadley gave all of the instructors are these paddles, and you can use them, students can use them, and in the classroom setting we use them as well, where everyone gets a dry erase marker and a paddle. So you can basically write down your answer and hold it up. And so that way, if everyone is participating as they should, there's less embarrassment if you put up, the answer is yes when the answer was really no. Well, you can quickly erase that, and you don't feel as singled out as a student with a learning disability if I'm called on and it's like, did the sun come out today? And then I put down yes, and then the answer is no. Then, sometimes students will feel that shame. Well, students with disabilities overall sometimes struggle with embarrassment and shame and feeling less than because of the way they're treated by their peers and or the adults slash instructors in their life. So having the response signals helps alleviate some of that. Choral and unison responding also helps as well, because as a teacher you can stand up at the front and basically look for the people who don't answer, or the ones who are kind of looking from side to side to see what everyone else is leaning towards. But it helps build confidence. So that way, if you know the answer is yes and you're not too sure, but you have everybody else saying yes and then you say yes too, and it's like, it kind of solidifies your thought processes of how you got to the answer of yes, and hopefully encourages that student to want to speak out more. You have providing corrective feedback, which is basically constructive criticism. So if a student raises their hand, if they have a disability or not, and they give the wrong answer, it's important as the instructor to, and as the parent, as the child care provider as well, to correct them as well, of course, but not necessarily in a negative way, and not necessarily, just don't do it in a negative way. One way to approach this is by, basically you say, you're on the right track, Johnny, or that's not quite where we were going, Johnny, but I see how you could have gotten that answer, and then you call on someone else. But you always want to circle back to help clear up the misconception that the student has, got in their head, because you don't want them to feel like they can't ever speak out in class again, and you want them to feel comfortable to speak up in class again and give an answer. But it also sends a message to the other students that you're not going to shame them in front of everyone else just because you didn't have the right answer. So that helps build confidence in the students, and it also helps build trust for you as the instructor, because you want the learning process to be an engaging one, especially with the younger kids and older students as well. But you want it to be a positive experience. So, excuse me, the corrective feedback helps with that. And finally, pacing. Pacing is once again, I say self-explanatory a lot, because one, I don't want you to overthink these terms when you come across them again, not if, but when you come across them again. I don't want you to overthink, what's pacing, and then make it be this long, drawn out process or thing, when in reality, small group instruction, self-explanatory. Response signals, just know that response signals can be, putting up red means yes, green means no. I mean, it can be a variety of things, from using paddle boards. They can be put their, thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. You can have them hold their thumbs up right in front of their chest. So therefore, if they're embarrassed, or you're thinking they may have anxiety about just answering in front of anyone, it can be something as simple as that. They can hold their hand up in front of their face and just put a 1 up if it's yes, or put a 5 up if it's no. I mean, different little things, because you want ultimately everyone to be engaged and everyone to be learning. Choral or unison responding, self-explanatory. Providing corrective feedback, think of it as constructive criticism. And then pacing is, once again, taking everything not necessarily slow, because the students may be learning the information, depending on how you presented it, they may be learning it at a faster pace than you thought. So therefore you can move on to the next concept, but you always want to make sure all students have the opportunity to practice what they're being taught, and then link it to what they already know, so that way they can keep going forward. And the only way you can do that is by engaging in some of these techniques, but also giving them an opportunity to practice. And the pacing comes in, that's when the pacing comes in. So it's about how fast the person is speaking, the instructor is speaking, but then also how fast and or slow you're taking it to get to the next concept. Because learning is, as we know, a building process. So you have to start somewhere, and you want to make sure everything is being paced at a fair amount, so that way the student has an opportunity to truly master the content. And then finally, you want to adapt the classroom materials. When you get a student and they have an IEP or a 504 plan, you want to plan around that. You don't want to just throw out a lesson there and be like, we're going to make this work for everyone. If you haven't planned for the student who needs extended time on their test, or plan for the student who needs to make sure they have an interpreter in there so they can take advantage of learning the material at the same time as their peers, you have to take all these things into consideration when you're planning your lesson. The lectures and reading assignments, those can be adapted as well. Everyone right now has access to tools on their iPad, or their tablet, I should say, their notebook, as well as in their computer and phone, and that thing is called assistive technology. There, and it's free and able for you to go jump on right now. There are built-in screen readers. There's ways for you to adjust the brightness of your monitor, so that way if you're a person who's triggered by, you know, a lot of the white light that and the blue light that comes from the computer screen, you can go in and adjust the monitor to help alleviate some of those symptoms that might be hindering your learning. There's ways you can turn on the screen reader as well to read everything on your screen, including the book, and so on and so forth. Excuse me. And then worksheets and tests can be adapted as well. I personally hate worksheets just because as a child I always felt like they were busy work. But I'm also a person who learns best by seeing and doing. So if you show me and then turn around, and it can be in person or it could, you know, be a video. Just show me the process and then give me the tools to let me manipulate and try and figure it out on my own. I learn a lot better that way, but that's just me. Some people do well with worksheets where they're just sitting there reading the information and they can give it right back and they've got it. So you want to take all this into consideration, because if a person has their preferred learning style and they end up having some type of disability that affects their learning, these are all things you want to take into account. Because if it's a worksheet and you have no choice but for it to be a worksheet, maybe it might be a thing where you make it an activity where they have to, say for instance, show how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So then you have to cut up the little strips of paper that have the different processes, and then they put them in order. So now it's become somewhat like an art project, because now they're cutting, they're pasting, they're coloring. And if you want, you can incorporate pictures. You're looking at how they sequence information. And then you can turn around and test on it basically based off of what you had them do versus what, you know, say for instance, you stood up and just said. And then lastly, the wrap up. LDs, learning disabilities, are always based on significant impairments in one or more developmental areas that impact reading, writing, and math. And reading and writing and math is what makes up learning. So therefore, a learning disability will be something that impacts one of those major areas. It may impact perception, memory, attention, cognition, and or organization. It's important to differentiate the instruction based on the student's disability needs. So you definitely, and I throw this out as an example because it's a reality. You don't want to have, you know, if you're aware that a student is in your classroom with a severe vision impairment, you may not want to do a lot of videos or have videos incorporated into every instruction, unless you're willing to go in and create like very detailed transcripts and audio around it so that the student can truly get what they need from the video, just like their sighted peers. And then you can also differentiate the practice sessions and assessments to accommodate the students' needs as well.